Well, hi, everybody. I'm Don Stewart, and welcome to a second edition of Breaking News for this Saturday. It's the 22nd day of March, 2025, and things continue to heat up in Israel as well as in the Middle East and other places, as our latest headlines reveal. All right, Israel now has launched a second wave of airstrikes in Lebanon after the early rocket attack that they received from Hezbollah. Accordingly, the U.S. has now issued travel warning for Israel amidst the protests that are taking place and the fighting that's occurring not only in the north, but also in the south with Gaza. Speaking of Gaza, Israel pushes through with Gaza migration plans as Hamas is, quote, unwilling to compromise. Surprise, surprise there. So they're working on getting the Gazan citizens out of the area there. Half of the Gaza residents, we are told, are ready to leave if given the chance. This is a survey that was done, a poll that was done. We know it's actually much more than that. And in a very interesting article, Vladimir Putin prayed for Donald Trump after the assassination attempt, the top envoy Witkoff says when he interviewed Putin. And then our final story, this is a fascinating one. Echoing the gospel account, traces of the ancient garden are found under the Church of the Holy Sepulcher. This is from the Times of Israel. And why that is important is Jesus, he said, where the place of his crucifixion, the place of his burial was near a garden, the garden tomb. And so we'll talk about the meaning of that. All right, let's go to the headlines. First of all, headline number one, Israel launches a second wave of airstrikes in Lebanon after a rocket attack. Defense minister and the prime minister hold Beirut responsible for everything that takes place within its territory. Hezbollah, of course, denies any involvement in this morning's attacks on the northern town of Metula. Israel then launched a second wave of airstrikes across southern and eastern Lebanon on Saturday evening, hours after the initial raid, following rocket fire toward the northern Israeli town of Metula. And so they've hit not once but twice a number of Hezbollah sites. They pounded them pretty good, actually, terrorist sites that are there. So this wasn't any real small wave of airstrikes. This was rather huge. And so it looks like Israel's northern border is going to heat up again militarily. And here we go again. All right. Now, speaking of here we go again, because of this, the U.S. issues travel warning for Israel amidst protests and regional escalation. The embassy urges American citizens to remain alert and avoid large gatherings, avoid all demonstration, the statement reads, because there are huge demonstrations going on in Tel Aviv every Saturday night. They had one this tonight, Israeli time, protesting a number of things. We will get into what they were protesting. But point is that this happens all the time. And it's very dicey now because you've got, the fighting in Lebanon resuming in northern Israel. You've got Gaza, they're sending rockets towards Tel Aviv. And speaking of rockets towards Tel Aviv, we've got also the Houthis in Yemen. They've already sent a number of missiles towards Tel Aviv. And so it's a very difficult situation there. So the U.S. Embassy has told American citizens to remain alert. The security environment is complex and can change quickly. Avoid all demonstrations and large gathering. Be aware of your surroundings and other location. And here's the key, the location, the nearest bomb shelter in case of a red alert. We've talked about that. The citizens of Israel, unfortunately, have become very well aware of where the bomb shelters are. They usually have about 30 to 45 seconds in most places in the country if the air raid siren goes off, unless you're on the border there, as we talked the other day about Sderot. You have 8 to 15 seconds at most to get to a bomb shelter if you hear the air raid signal. And this is where the way they live. It was been psychologically so horrific on the country. And for 3.5 months, it's been relatively calm, but here we go again. So we'll keep an eye on that. So it's anything but peaceful now in Israel. And of course, it's likely to get much worse with the present situation in Lebanon and Gaza. Headline number three, Israel pushes through with Gaza migration plans as Hamas is unwilling to compromise. Yeah, Israel plans to use the current ground operation, among other things, to advance the migration plan and remove the people in a safer place in Gaza than eventually out of Gaza. Hamas is still unwilling to compromise in hostage deals, a source familiar with the details told the Jerusalem Post on Saturday, 1 week into Israel's renewed offensive in Gaza. Israel has been attacking Gaza for 7 days, but Hamas is showing no flexibility, which is preventing the negotiations from resuming, the source added. As the Security Cabinet convened in Jerusalem on Saturday evening, an Israeli official told the Jerusalem Post that given Hamas's current stance, Jerusalem, here it is, would escalate its military operations in the coming days. Well, well, well. Unwilling to compromise. Now, how does Mr. Witkoff respond to this after his claim about Hamas? Really, wants this all to be over. They don't want to get themselves killed. They're really a bunch of nice guys there. The comments have kept on coming, by the way. The Witkoff interview with Tucker Carlson, you've got comments galore. They're all negative. They admit that the guy really doesn't know what he's talking about, what he's doing, doesn't understand Hamas, doesn't understand the Middle East, doesn't understand that Hamas has one goal, and that's the destruction of the state of Israel, and that's what they live for and die for. So he just doesn't get it. All right, headline number 4. We're told that half of the Gaza residents are ready to leave if given the chance. So they did a Gallup survey, indicates that Germany ranks as the most desired destination among those considering relocations. And the Germans would say, Nein, danke, no thanks, because they've had like a million um, people come in, migrants have caused all sorts of problems in Germany. Now, as we mentioned earlier, our friend Notter, who has his people everywhere in the area, he told David Tall and me when we had the lunch a couple of weeks ago that literally everyone wants to leave Gaza from their association with the people there. He said there's maybe 5,000 want to stay, but of the 2 million, they all want to leave. They all want to get out of there, but many are afraid to say so. So we now have a story. The next one is basically not a story you would be expecting. This is fascinating. Headline number 5. Vladimir Putin prayed for Trump after assassination attempt, top envoy said. The Russian president was praying for his friend, Steve Witkoff claimed. Interesting, Witkoff claimed that Putin and Trump are friends. A couple of days ago, Tulsi Gabbard had to get an apology from someone who claimed that she said that Putin and Trump were friends, which he never did. And again, they got the press that did that had to apologize to her. Now, Witkoff says this. Okay, Russian President Vladimir Putin prayed for Donald Trump after the then presidential candidate was shot last year, top envoy Steve Witkoff revealed on Friday. Witkoff, who had visited Moscow twice to hash out the terms of a ceasefire with Ukraine, told former Fox News anti-Semite host Tucker Carlson on his podcast that during his second meeting with Putin, the Russian president recounted his reaction to the attempted assassination of Trump at a campaign rally last summer. When the president was shot, he went to his local church and met with his priest and prayed for the president, Witkoff said of Putin. Putin had a friendship with him and was praying for his friend, Witkoff explained. He added that he had relayed the sentimental story to Trump, who was clearly touched. Now, oddly, Putin has made statements like this in the past about his Christian beliefs. While his behavior certainly does not follow what he claims to believe, it's really interesting that he does speak about this. So we'll just report the story as it is and leave it at that. Now, an interesting story here. They're all interesting, by the way, but number 6 in particular is from the Times of Israel. Echoing the gospel account, it traces an ancient garden found under the Church of the Holy Sepulcher. A landmark excavation set to conclude soon at the Old City of Jerusalem Church has offered unprecedented historical insight. Some 2,000 years ago, olive trees and grapevines likely grew on the land where the Church of the Holy Sepulcher in Jerusalem stands today, new archaeological excavations at the site have revealed. The findings mirror a description of the area included in the Gospel of John. It says this in John 19:19-20. Now, in the place where he was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden a new sepulchre, wherein was never a man yet laid. There they laid Jesus, John 19:19-20. And also we're told in the Gospels, this garden and this place where he was crucified was outside of the city of Jerusalem. So the article goes on to say, the presence of olive trees and grapevines was identified through archaeobotanical and pollen analysis of samples retrieved from the excavations under the floor of the ancient basilica. From the archaeological context and strata, it belongs to the pre-Christian era. However, radiocarbon testing has not yet been carried out. We know that this area was already part of the city at the time of Emperor Hadrian when the Romans built Aelia Capitolina. That's what they renamed the city of Jerusalem after the city of Jerusalem was destroyed by them in AD 70, said Francesca Romana Stastola of the Sapienza University of Rome, referring to the Roman city erected on the ruins of Jerusalem in the first half of the second century. However, at the time of Jesus, this was not yet part of the city, it was outside of the city. And this is, again, what the Gospels say about the Holy Sepulcher and Calvary. According to Christian tradition, the Church of the Holy Sepulcher stands on the spot where Jesus was crucified, known as Calvary or Golgotha, and on its nearby tomb, which today is surmounted by an edicule built in 1810. In 2019, after decades of infighting, the three central religious communities managing the church, the Orthodox Patriarchy, the Custody of the Holy Land, and the Armenian Patriarchy, agreed to significant renovations to replace the building's floor, mostly dating to the 19th century. The endeavor has marked the first major restoration project in the basilica since the aftermath of a fire in 1808. So it's been over 200 years since any work was done. With the renovation works, the religious community decided to also allow archaeological excavations under the floor, Stestola said, as she sat down with the Times of Israel for the first comprehensive interview she has given since the beginning of the excavations. However, at the moment, we do not have any digging area open. The church is getting ready for Easter when it needs to be fully accessible by pilgrims, she noted. All right, many of you know there are two competing sites for the exact place where Jesus was crucified and buried in the city of Jerusalem. This site, the Church of the Holy Sepulcher, and the Garden Tomb. When we take a tour to Israel, and I've been there on 18 different times, and I've been part of or led about a dozen different tours, and we always end up at the Garden Tomb. It's the highlight of the trip, Jerusalem, the crescendo of all that goes on. And it's literally like an oasis in the hustle bustle of Jerusalem. If you've been to Jerusalem, the bus, you've got so much going on there, the traffic. You go to the Garden Tomb and it's so quiet. It's such a difference in everywhere in the rest of the city. So it's a great place to end the tour. Anyway, when you get there, there are four lines of evidence that are presented as to why this was the tomb of Jesus. First, it is a new tomb where nobody ever resided. Second, it is outside of the boundaries of the ancient city of Jerusalem at the time. Third, there is a garden near the tomb. And fourth, and most important, why it can be the tomb of Jesus, it is empty. I'm Don Stewart. Thanks for watching. We'll be with you again next time with more stories on breaking news. So much going on. And again, we see things happening very quickly now, moving towards the events that the Bible talks about the end of the age. And so we'll be with you again tomorrow, another edition of Breaking News. And until then, as always, may the Lord, the risen Savior, the risen Jesus Christ, richly, richly bless you.